Most people spend their entire lives trying to protect a version of themselves that was never truly real. The image you show the world, the one that craves validation, avoids rejection and fears being insignificant, isn't your true self. It's your ego, a mask shaped by pain, fear, and unmet needs. But there comes a moment in every awakened life when this false identity begins to crack. That moment feels like death, not of the body but of everything you once believed about who you are, and that's where true transformation begins. Ego death is not about destruction, it's about liberation. It's the painful process of releasing what isn't you so you can finally meet who you are beneath the noise. The journey is terrifying, but it's also sacred, because the more you let go of who you thought you were, the closer you move toward the truth, and the truth is where your real power lives. The ego is not your enemy, but it is not your truth either. It is a structure that forms in response to the world around you, a psychological armor built from childhood wounds, cultural conditioning, fears, and unmet emotional needs. From an early age you start learning who you should be to receive love, attention, and acceptance. You are taught to hide your sadness, suppress your anger, outperform others, fit in, stand out, be nice, be strong, be quiet. And without even realizing it, you begin to layer masks over your core self. This collection of roles, expectations, and defenses eventually becomes your identity, or what you believe is your identity. This is the ego. The ego thrives on survival, not truth. It is obsessed with maintaining a consistent narrative about who you are, even if that narrative is rooted in pain. If you were taught you had to be perfect to be loved, the ego will obsessively strive for flawlessness. If you were made to feel invisible, the ego might overcompensate by chasing attention or external success. It shapes your behavior, your decisions, your relationships, and even your spirituality. But the terrifying irony is that while the ego is trying to protect you, it also traps you. It traps you in patterns that repeat the very wounds you're trying to escape. The ego is not inherently evil, it's just misguided. It clings to the past and fears the future. It resists change because change threatens its control. And this is where suffering begins. You start to feel disconnected from yourself. You begin asking questions like, why am I not happy? Or why do I always feel like something is missing? These questions are not signs of failure. They are signs that your true self is trying to wake up from the illusion. Recognizing the false self means becoming aware of the internal voice that constantly compares, judges, blames, and fears. It means noticing when you're performing rather than living. It means catching the moments where you're doing things not because they're aligned with your soul, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. When you catch these patterns, you begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by fear, not purpose, and in that awareness, the unraveling begins. This is not a one-time realization. The ego is cunning. It will try to reassert itself in new spiritual disguises. It might use healing itself as a way to feel superior. It might cling to victimhood to avoid responsibility. It might disguise control as love, or arrogance as confidence. That's why this process demands radical honesty and deep humility. You have to be willing to question everything you think you are. Every title, every belief, every achievement, every story. You have to ask, who am I without all of this? And then sit in the terrifying silence that follows. That silence is sacred. It is the space where the true self begins to stir. But before that truth can emerge, the false self must be seen for what it is, not evil, not broken, just scared. And once you see the ego clearly, you can stop letting it drive your life. You can begin the process of letting go, not through force or hate, but through compassion. Because only when the false self is lovingly dismantled can the authentic self begin to rise. And that is the beginning of ego death, a painful, beautiful, necessary shedding of everything you're not so you can remember everything you truly are. Letting go of control is one of the most terrifying yet liberating steps in ego death. The ego is obsessed with control, not because it enjoys power, but because it fears vulnerability. It believes that by managing every outcome, every interaction, and every perception others have of us, we can somehow be safe. Safe from rejection, from chaos, from failure, from heartbreak. But in this desperate pursuit of control, we become prisoners of our own fear. We micromanage our lives so tightly that there's no room for the unknown, no space for growth, no freedom to simply be. Control becomes a cage, one that feels secure at first but slowly suffocates the soul. When we begin to see that most of our actions are rooted in a desire to control, a deep discomfort arises. We notice how often we edit ourselves in conversations to avoid judgment. We notice how we overthink every decision, fearing the consequences of getting it wrong. We see how we stay in unfulfilling relationships because we'd rather feel familiar pain than risk the pain of the unknown. All of this control is fueled by the ego's foundational illusion that life must conform to its expectations to be safe or meaningful. But the truth is, life doesn't operate on the ego's terms, and the more we resist the flow of life, the more we suffer. The ego's grip on control is a reaction to inner chaos. Somewhere along the way we experienced a lack of safety, and so we vowed consciously or unconsciously to never feel that powerless again. Control became our coping mechanism, our strategy for survival. But what we don't realize is that the more we cling to control, the further we drift from peace. Peace isn't found in having everything figured out. It's found in trusting ourselves enough to handle whatever life brings, even when it's messy, uncertain, or painful. Letting go of control doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means releasing the belief that we can force life to unfold the way we want. It means learning to respond to life rather than constantly trying to shape it. It means stepping into a deeper level of trust, not in the external world but in our own inner resilience. It's trusting that even if things don't go according to plan, we will be okay. It's trusting that uncertainty is not the enemy, it's the birthplace of transformation. This surrendering process is often misunderstood. Many believe that letting go is weak, that surrender means giving up. But in truth, surrender is one of the most courageous acts of the soul. It's choosing to soften when everything inside you wants to tighten. It's choosing to feel rather than numb, to release rather than grasp. It's standing in the chaos of not knowing and saying, I trust life, I trust myself. That's not weakness, that's power. As we begin to release control, we may feel lost at first. Our ego, which has long driven the ship, will panic. It will whisper fears like, you'll fall behind, or you won't be loved if you change, or if you let go, everything will fall apart. And yet the opposite is true. As we loosen our grip, we make space for authenticity, for creativity, for genuine connection. We begin to experience life as it is, not just as we wish it to be. And in doing so, we start living, not surviving. Control is rooted in fear, but surrender is rooted in love. Love for life, love for truth, love for the self that exists beyond roles and masks. And when we surrender, we don't lose ourselves. We rediscover who we are underneath the armor. We remember that we were never meant to carry the entire weight of life on our shoulders. We were meant to participate in it, to dance with it, to learn from it. In this space of surrender, something profound happens. We begin to feel lighter, not because life is easier, but because we're no longer resisting it. We're no longer trying to prove ourselves or protect an image or control every outcome. We simply show up, fully present, fully human. And in that presence we find freedom, the kind of freedom the ego could never manufacture, no matter how tightly it held the reins. Letting go of control is not a one-time event, it's a daily practice. Every moment we choose presence over perfection, trust over fear, and curiosity over certainty. We chip away at the ego's illusion. We reclaim our power, not the power to dominate life, but the power to meet life with open hands and an open heart. That is the path of transformation. That is the quiet, radical strength found only through surrender. The ego thrives on identity. It clings to labels, roles, achievements, and stories that tell us who we are. But these identities, though familiar and comforting, are often incomplete or entirely false. They are built from past wounds, cultural expectations, parental conditioning, and survival strategies. The ego says, I am my success, or I am my trauma, or I am the role I play in others' lives. And the more tightly we hold on to these identities, the more distant we become from our authentic self. Ego death requires the dismantling of these false identities, peeling away everything we thought we were to discover who we truly are beneath the masks. The problem with ego-constructed identities is that they're usually based on fear. For example, someone who was constantly criticized as a child may grow into an adult, obsessed with perfectionism. Their identity becomes the one who never makes mistakes. Someone who was abandoned may become the one who is always needed, constantly rescuing others to avoid being left again. These identities aren't true expressions of the soul, they are reactions to pain, they are armor, and while they may have helped us survive at one point, they eventually become prisons that prevent us from fully living. When we begin to question our identity, the ego becomes threatened. It panics, because its entire sense of existence is built on consistency and control. If I'm not the smart one, the strong one, or the funny one, then who am I? The mind doesn't like not knowing, so it clings harder, insisting that we stick to the script. But awakening begins the moment we're willing to step off that stage. The moment we say, maybe I'm more than what I've been told. Maybe there's a deeper truth I haven't yet explored. This questioning is not self-doubt, it's self-inquiry, and it's the doorway to freedom. Dismantling false identity isn't about rejecting everything we've ever been. It's about asking where it came from, why we adopted it, and whether it still serves us. This requires radical honesty. We have to look at our motivations and behaviors with compassion, but without illusion. Why do I always say yes to others? Why do I push myself to exhaustion for success? Why do I hide parts of myself in relationships? These questions shine a light on the hidden architecture of our ego, the blueprints it drew long ago to keep us safe. But now that we're older and more conscious, we can choose to rewrite those blueprints. As we begin to shed false layers, we experience what some call a void, a space of not knowing. This void can feel terrifying. Without our old labels, we don't know who we are anymore. We may feel empty, confused, or directionless. But this void isn't a sign of failure. It's the fertile soil of rebirth. It's where the real self begins to emerge. The self that isn't based on fear, trauma, or performance. The self that just is, without needing to impress, prove, or protect. In this space, we discover aspects of ourselves we had forgotten or never dared to explore. We might reconnect with creativity, with intuition, with a sense of aliveness that was buried beneath duty or image. We realize that we don't need to be everything to everyone. We don't need to constantly perform. We're allowed to be messy, complex, evolving beings, and this realization is profoundly healing. It dissolves the shame that often comes from not living up to our own or others' expectations. Because now we're not living to meet an image, we're living to meet our truth. This process is not always linear or smooth. Sometimes we relapse into old roles. Sometimes we grieve the parts of ourselves we're letting go of, even if they were painful. That's okay. Healing is not about perfection, it's about awareness and choice. Every time we notice ourselves falling into an old identity and gently guide ourselves back to authenticity, we are growing. Every moment of honesty is a step deeper into the real self. Eventually we reach a point where we don't need to define ourselves so rigidly. We don't need to say, I am this or I am that. We begin to live with more fluidity, more openness. We become less concerned with how we're perceived, and more curious about what feels true. We stop chasing validation and start seeking alignment. We move from survival to presence, and this shift changes everything, from our relationships to our work to the way we speak to ourselves. Letting go of false identity is one of the most powerful parts of ego death. It's not a loss, it's a liberation. It's the shedding of everything that was never really us, so we can finally breathe in our own skin. It's the realization that we were never broken, only buried. And as the layers fall away, we don't become someone new. We remember who we've been all along. True ego death doesn't end in emptiness. It awakens a deeper connection with life itself. When we let go of the illusions we clung to, we create space for something far more real to emerge. What arises is not a new persona or a better version of the old self. It's presence, a deep grounded awareness that doesn't need identity to exist. We begin to feel life instead of controlling it. We stop reacting from old patterns and start responding from a place of truth. This is the spiritual rebirth that follows ego death, not flashy or grand, but quiet, steady, and deeply transformative. In this state, everything becomes more vivid. We begin to notice small things that once went unseen, a breeze against the skin, a genuine smile, the pause before a choice. These are not just moments, they are invitations. Invitations to live with intention, to stay conscious, to align our actions with our inner knowing. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It's not performance and it's not fragile. It's rooted in the experience of having stripped away what was false and survived the emptiness that followed. It's born from inner clarity, the clarity that we are not our past, our roles, or even our thoughts. We are the awareness behind it all. As this new self begins to integrate, the need for validation fades. We no longer chase approval from others, because we have made peace within. Silence, once terrifying, becomes sacred. Solitude becomes a friend rather than a punishment. And from this grounded space, we begin to live differently. Relationships become more authentic because we're no longer relating from masks. Decisions become simpler because we're no longer torn between who we are and who we think we should be. We trust ourselves not because we've figured everything out, but because we've stopped running from our own truth. This rebirth is not a one-time event, it's a way of being. We begin to live in cycles of death and renewal, letting go of what no longer serves us and staying open to what wants to emerge. This makes us resilient because we're not afraid of change. We've already faced the death of who we thought we were and discovered we're still here. That kind of strength can't be taken away. It's the kind of strength that bends but doesn't break, that adapts but doesn't betray itself. With ego quieted, we can finally hear the voice of the soul. It speaks in nudges, not commands. It guides through feeling, not force. The soul doesn't shout over the ego. It waits until the ego steps aside. And when we make space for it, we begin to see life differently. We no longer view struggle as failure, but as a teacher. We no longer seek to dominate life, but to dance with it. This is not passivity, it's power rooted in wisdom, a calm power that doesn't need to control because it trusts the flow. In this stage, creativity often flourishes, not the kind driven by egoic ambition, but the kind that springs from inner alignment. We write, speak, build, connect, not to be seen but because it's who we are. The work becomes sacred, not because others applaud it, but because it feels true. We're no longer bound to prove our worth, we already feel it. That shift changes how we show up in every area of life, from work to love to the way we speak to a stranger. Authenticity becomes effortless because we're not trying to be anything, we're just being. We also begin to see others more clearly. Without the noise of ego projecting judgment or comparison, we can meet people as they are. We don't need them to mirror us, agree with us, or complete us. We appreciate them for who they are, even if they're different. This makes space for deeper intimacy and fewer power struggles. We can love without attachment and walk away without bitterness. We begin to understand that everyone is on their own path, and ours no longer depends on how others treat us. Even pain transforms in this space. We no longer resist it or identify with it. We feel it, learn from it, and let it pass. Suffering becomes information, not identity. Triggers become portals, not prisons. And that shift in perspective frees up immense energy. Energy we once used to suppress, hide, or protect our ego is now available for creation, connection, and presence. We start living lighter, not because life is easier, but because we're no longer weighed down by who we're pretending to be. This is what it means to awaken after ego death, to live with clarity and compassion, to no longer fear your own reflection, to show up not as a role but as a presence. The journey is not about escaping the self, it's about finding the self that was never lost, only buried. When you meet life from this place, everything changes, not because the world is different, but because you are. And in that shift, you no longer chase meaning, you live it.